At 68 years old, Cindy Landon, who once stood silently beside Michael Landon, has finally broken down in tears. For decades she carried the weight of whispers, the rumors that shadowed her husband through every step of his remarkable career. To millions, Landon was the perfect American father, the rugged star of Bonanza, the devoted Charles Ingalls of Little House on the Prairie, the angelic Jonathan Smith in Highway to Heaven. But behind the glow of primetime television was a man who lived a double life, one his family endured in private, and one his wife has now confirmed to be true. Michael Landon's story is not only about stardom, it is about a boy scarred by pain who transformed himself into a television legend, a man who inspired millions while carrying secrets that haunted those closest to him. His legacy was built on inspiration, yet it was also shadowed by betrayal, scandal, and choices that left scars long after the cameras stopped rolling. So why, after all these years, has his wife chosen now to speak? What was she forced to protect for so long? And what devastating truth has left her in tears even today? Michael Landon was not just an actor. For many families across America, he was a symbol of strength, morality, and devotion. His career unfolded in a way that felt almost mythic, a steady climb from television westerns to the very heart of family entertainment. On Bonanza, he became Little Joe Cartwright, the young son who grew into a man before the audience's eyes. His good looks, natural charm, and emotional intensity made him one of the most beloved characters on a series that ran for more than a decade. Yet it was only the beginning. When Landon left Bonanza, he reinvented himself, not simply as an actor, but as a storyteller in control of every frame. Little House on the Prairie was more than a television show. It was a cultural phenomenon, shaping how an entire generation understood faith, resilience, and family. As Charles Ingalls, Landon embodied the qualities of a devoted husband and father: selflessness, endurance, and quiet heroism. Viewers did not just watch him, they believed in him. The children who grew up in the 70s and 80s often said they felt as if Charles Ingalls were their second father, a steady presence who guided them through the hardships of life. This image followed Landon into Highway to Heaven, where he portrayed Jonathan Smith, an angel sent to Earth to help people find hope in the darkest of circumstances. The role cemented his reputation as a man of compassion, someone whose very presence suggested trust and comfort. Critics might have debated the shows, but audiences did not. They tuned in week after week, not just for entertainment but for reassurance. In Michael Landon, they saw a man who seemed incapable of cruelty, a man who lived by the values he portrayed on screen. Yet those who worked closely with him noticed something deeper. Behind the warm eyes and charismatic smile was a man with an unyielding will, a perfectionist who tolerated nothing less than complete dedication. Co-stars remembered the intensity of his gaze when he directed a scene, the way he insisted on doing things his way, and how he often pushed people to their limits. For some, it was inspiring, proof that Landon was a visionary who cared about getting every detail right. For others, it was intimidating, a reminder that the wholesome family man on screen could transform into a figure of iron control when the cameras stopped rolling. This tension defined Landon's career. He was adored by the public for the purity of the roles he chose, yet behind the scenes he was feared and respected in equal measure. His colleagues sometimes wondered whether Charles Ingalls and Jonathan Smith were roles he played for the world, or ideals he was desperately trying to live up to himself. That contradiction became the heart of his life. To the millions who only knew him through television, Michael Landon was the embodiment of kindness. To those who lived and worked with him, he was far more complicated, a man whose private choices told a very different story. The golden image of Michael Landon could not last forever. It was too bright, too flawless to survive under the weight of reality. The question that haunted both fans and family was simple: which version of Landon was real, the saintly father America trusted, or the flawed man struggling to keep his carefully built image from collapsing? Long before Michael Landon became America's most trusted father figure, he was a frightened boy named Eugene Maurice Horowitz, growing up in Collingswood, New Jersey. His early years bore little resemblance to the idealized families he would later bring to television screens. Instead, they were marked by instability, fear, and a sense of isolation that never fully left him. Landon's father, Eli, worked in movie theater management. His mother, Peggy, struggled deeply with mental illness and unpredictable moods. For young Eugene, home was not a place of comfort but of volatility. His mother's emotional breakdowns often left him terrified, and her attempts to end her own life scarred him with a fear he would carry into adulthood. One incident that he rarely spoke about involved her trying to drown herself in front of him. The image of his mother, fragile and broken, left a mark that no amount of later fame or fortune could erase. This trauma shaped Michael's understanding of the world. He developed a keen sense of performance, not just as an actor, but as a son who needed to survive. He learned early how to mask pain, how to smile when chaos swirled behind closed doors, how to project strength even when he felt powerless. These lessons became the foundation of his screen presence. When audiences believed in the steady hand of Charles Ingalls or the calm reassurance of Jonathan Smith, they were watching a man who had built that persona out of necessity, first for his family and later for the world. School offered no escape. Michael was bullied for his small size and his awkwardness. Yet it was also where he discovered his resilience. A track coach noticed his potential and guided him toward athletics. Running became both his outlet and his refuge. On the field, he could channel his anger and fear into speed, breaking records and catching the attention of college recruiters. Athletics gave him discipline and focus, two traits that later defined his career behind the camera. But even here, his mother's shadow followed him. At one competition, she humiliated him publicly by cutting his hair short against his will, a reminder that he could never entirely escape the turmoil at home. By the time he earned a scholarship to the University of Southern California, Michael thought he had found his escape. But an injury ended his athletic career, forcing him to pivot. With little more than determination, he turned to acting. He changed his name to Michael Landon, symbolically severing ties with the broken boy he once was. Yet the name change could not erase the pain. The child who had grown up in fear remained inside him, shaping every decision he made as an adult. This troubled childhood explains much of the contradiction in Landon's later life. His obsession with control on set, his perfectionism, and even his bursts of anger can be traced back to a boy who grew up in a home where nothing felt safe or stable. At the same time, his ability to inspire, to portray compassion so convincingly, came from the same place. He knew what it meant to long for love, for stability, for a father figure who never turned away. Audiences saw the polished version of Michael Landon, the man who seemed to have all the answers. But those closest to him recognized something else, a man still haunted by the ghosts of his childhood, driven to create on screen the very security and devotion he had been denied in real life. It was this contradiction, the hero America wanted and the wounded boy beneath, that would follow him into adulthood and shape every chapter of his story. By the time Michael Landon had established himself as more than just an actor, he was no longer content to follow other people's direction. He wanted control, not just of his performance, but of the stories, the characters, and even the atmosphere on set. When Little House on the Prairie began production in the early 1970s, Landon seized his chance. As both star and executive producer, he became the guiding force behind the show, shaping it into the wholesome frontier saga that millions came to adore. To outsiders, this dual role looked like a mark of genius. He was praised as one of the few actors in Hollywood who could carry the weight of a show both in front of and behind the camera. But to those who worked under him, the experience was more complicated. Landon demanded absolute loyalty, and he expected his cast and crew to work as tirelessly as he did. He was famous for his long shooting days, his insistence that every scene be rehearsed until perfect, and his refusal to accept excuses. Co-stars have recalled how inspiring it could be to watch Landon at work, his passion lifting the entire production. Yet they also remembered the intensity that bordered on intimidation. He was not cruel in the traditional sense. He did not scream without reason or lash out at random, but his quiet anger, when things did not go his way, was just as unsettling. He could cut someone down with a look, and when he felt betrayed, he did not forgive easily. Melissa Gilbert, who played his daughter Laura, often described him as a father figure, someone who filled a void in her life. But even she witnessed moments when Landon's need for control strained relationships. Behind the smiles that viewers saw on screen, there were tensions: actors who felt overshadowed, crew members who struggled under the constant pressure to meet his expectations, and colleagues who dared not challenge him. His charm could disarm, but his authority could silence. This duality extended to Highway to Heaven. Once again, Landon insisted on shaping the production according to his vision. He believed in the power of television to heal, to inspire, to give audiences hope, yet the way he pursued that vision revealed the contradictions at the core of his character. He worked himself relentlessly, often writing scripts late into the night, directing episodes while starring in them, and demanding that everyone else keep up. For some, it was proof of his brilliance. For others, it was proof that he valued his own ideals above the well-being of those around him. The intensity came from a place that only a few understood. Landon's difficult childhood had taught him to distrust chaos, to fear failure, and to cling to control as if it were survival itself. On set, this translated into an iron grip. He wanted to be the provider, the leader, the one who ensured that everything ran smoothly. Yet in doing so, he sometimes crushed the very people who looked to him for guidance. And so the contradiction deepened. America saw Michael Landon as the embodiment of kindness, the patient father who always listened, the angel who never faltered. But on set, he was a man who demanded perfection, whose temper sometimes left scars, and whose vision allowed little room for compromise. It was not malicious intent that drove him. It was fear, ambition, and the ghosts of his past. Still, the result was the same. Behind the wholesome stories that united families across America, there were quiet conflicts, strained friendships, and a leader whose need for control sometimes overshadowed the very love he was trying to portray. For years, Michael Landon managed to keep the public focused on his television image, but behind closed doors, his private life told a different story. The wholesome husband and devoted father that audiences adored often clashed with the man who struggled with temptation, secrecy, and choices that fractured his family. His marriage to Lynn No seemed, for a time, to mirror the stable homes he portrayed on screen. They had 5 children together, and photographs from the period painted a picture of domestic happiness, smiling vacations, Christmas mornings, proud fatherhood. Yet beneath the surface, strain was growing. Landon's relentless work schedule kept him away from home, and the control he exercised on set did not vanish when he stepped through his front door. The balance between career and marriage tilted sharply, and it was not long before rumors of infidelity began to circle. By the late 1970s, whispers became undeniable. Landon's relationship with Cindy Landon, a much younger makeup artist from Little House on the Prairie, became the turning point. The affair shattered his marriage to Lynn and sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Fans who had built their trust on his on-screen morality suddenly faced a harsher truth. America's favorite father had broken the very vows that defined the characters he played. The tabloids seized on the story. Headlines painted Landon as a hypocrite, and critics accused him of betraying not just his family, but the millions who idolized him. Lynn's heartbreak became public, and for the first time, Landon's carefully crafted image began to unravel. To some, it was the ultimate betrayal, a reminder that even the most inspiring television roles could not guarantee virtue in real life. But the scandal did not stop there. Rumors spread of other affairs, other women whose names never reached the papers, but whose presence deepened the cracks in his reputation. Landon defended himself, insisting that he had found love where it was meant to be found, but the damage was done. His divorce from Lynn, finalized in the early 1980s, left behind not only a broken marriage, but children caught in the storm of public scrutiny. The affair with Cindy Clerico eventually turned into marriage, and Landon sought to rebuild his image once more. He embraced fatherhood again, determined to prove that he could hold his family together. But for many, the betrayal lingered. The man who taught lessons about honesty and loyalty on Little House on the Prairie had failed to live by them in his own home. These scandals haunted Landon for the rest of his career. Every success on Highway to Heaven was shadowed by questions about his personal integrity. Could America still believe in Charles Ingalls or Jonathan Smith when the actor behind them had fallen so far from grace? Fans were divided. Some forgave, insisting that Landon was only human. Others never forgot, pointing to the betrayal as proof that the rumors had been true all along. What made the affairs so devastating was not just the broken promises, it was the collapse of an illusion. For years, Landon had seemed untouchable, the rare celebrity whose private life matched his public persona. The revelations exposed the gap between the man and the myth, leaving even those who loved him unsure of which version of Michael Landon they could trust. And yet, in spite of everything, his shows remained beloved. The contradictions only fueled the fascination. Michael Landon was both the angel on television and the man who broke hearts at home. It was a truth that his wife, his children, and his fans could never ignore, and one that left scars long after the headlines faded. By the early 1990s, Michael Landon's public image was already fragile. The scandals of his personal life had reshaped how fans and critics viewed him, yet his television work still carried enough power to keep him in America's living rooms. For many, he remained Charles Ingalls, the eternal father figure, or Jonathan Smith, the angel whose compassion never faltered. But time was catching up with him, and in the spring of 1991 everything changed. Landon announced that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest forms of the disease. The news spread like wildfire. To fans who had spent decades looking to him for hope and stability, the revelation felt like a personal loss. The man who had carried generations through hardship on television was suddenly fighting for his own life. The press swarmed around the story, turning his illness into front-page headlines, and old rumors about his past resurfaced with renewed force. Could his lifestyle, the smoking, the drinking, the stress and the scandals have contributed to his fate? Was the collapse of his body a reflection of the hidden turmoil that had defined so much of his private life? For Landon, the diagnosis was not only physical but symbolic. The myth he had so carefully cultivated began to crumble. He no longer looked like the invincible figure who had strode across the prairie or the angel who could outwit death. He was thin, weakened, and visibly suffering. Public appearances revealed a man stripped of the larger-than-life aura that had once shielded him. The father America relied on could not protect himself. Yet in those final months, another side of Landon emerged, one that complicated his story even further. Rather than retreating into silence, he faced his illness with a defiance that reminded the world of why they loved him. He gave interviews where he spoke candidly about his fight, sometimes with humor, sometimes with bitterness, but always with honesty. For a man who had spent his career controlling narratives, there was something strangely liberating about allowing the truth to be seen. Fans who had felt betrayed by his scandals now saw vulnerability, and for some, it rekindled their loyalty. Still, behind the brave front, the reality was devastating. His family struggled to hold together under the weight of his illness. His children watched their father fade, while Cindy, his second wife, endured the same relentless spotlight that had once consumed Lynn. Landon's strength had always been tied to his ability to project control, but cancer stripped that away, leaving him exposed. The myth was gone. What remained was a man in pain, a man whose flaws and greatness now stood side by side. The collapse of Michael Landon's image was not just about sickness. It was about the reckoning that came when his carefully maintained facade collided with reality. For years he had lived in two worlds, the television saint and the flawed husband, the visionary leader and the man haunted by demons from his past. In his final months, those contradictions could no longer be hidden. He was at last revealed in full, beloved and broken, inspiring and imperfect. Michael Landon died in July of 1991 at the age of 54. His death left fans grieving, but it also forced them to confront the truth behind the roles. The myth had collapsed, but the man, complex, contradictory, unforgettable, remained. And in that, perhaps, lay the real legacy of Michael Landon: not perfection, but humanity, fragile and undeniable. In the years after Michael Landon's death, his legacy became a battlefield of memory. On one side were the millions of fans who refused to see anything but the man they had grown up with. The father on Little House on the Prairie, the angel on Highway to Heaven, the gentle presence who embodied hope and morality. To them, Landon's flaws were irrelevant, mere distractions from a body of work that had shaped generations. On the other side were those who had known him more intimately, family members, colleagues, and even critics, who carried a far more complicated picture. For them, his story was one of brilliance shadowed by betrayal, of kindness undercut by control, of a man who never fully escaped the contradictions of his past. Fans continued to watch reruns long after his passing, passing them on to children and grandchildren as if the shows themselves were heirlooms. Charles Ingalls remained the model father, the rock of the Prairie family, while Jonathan Smith was still the angel who reminded people of the power of faith and compassion. For viewers, these characters became Michael Landon himself, an unchanging presence who seemed to live forever through the screen. His impact on television could not be denied. He had created series that were not only popular but enduring, stories that still drew audiences decades later. But the people who had worked beside him told a different story. Co-stars like Melissa Gilbert acknowledged both his warmth and his temper, the father figure he offered, and the distance that could suddenly appear. Crew members remembered his intensity, his perfectionism, and the way he could dominate every decision. His marriages told their own story, of devotion followed by betrayal, of children left confused, of wives forced to endure humiliation under the spotlight of public scandal. For them, Landon's greatness was inseparable from his flaws. He was both inspiring and destructive, both devoted and selfish. This duality created a legacy in conflict. Was he to be remembered as a saint or as a sinner? A visionary leader or a controlling presence? A devoted family man or a husband who betrayed his vows? The truth, of course, lay in all of these at once. Michael Landon was not one thing but many, something fans struggled to accept, even as those closest to him confirmed it. Over time, the debate only deepened. Documentaries revisited his career, highlighting both the triumphs and the scandals. Biographies painted portraits that swung between admiration and critique. Interviews with family members revealed wounds that had never fully healed, alongside memories of love and laughter that could not be erased. The world wanted a single, clean story, but Michael Landon's life resisted simplicity. And perhaps that is why his legacy endures. Audiences do not simply remember him because he was perfect. They remember him because he was human. The very contradictions that fractured his private life also made his performances resonate. When he played Charles Ingalls, struggling to keep a family together, or Jonathan Smith bringing comfort to strangers, it felt real, because Landon himself knew what it meant to struggle, to fail, to long for redemption. His art was not detached from his flaws, it was born from them. Even now, decades after his death, Michael Landon remains one of television's most fascinating figures. His legacy is not the spotless image he tried to maintain, nor the scandals that sought to define him, but the tension between the two. He was both the dream and the disillusionment, the hero and the man behind the mask, and in that complexity his story continues to live on. At 68, Cindy Landon could no longer carry the silence. Her tears confirmed what so many had whispered: what those closest to him had long understood, that Michael was both the man the world loved and the man who left behind shadows. He was a husband who inspired and betrayed, a father who comforted and wounded, a star who built stories of hope while wrestling with truths that could not be hidden forever. Her confession was not meant to erase the love she shared with him, nor to tarnish the memory that millions still hold dear. It was, instead, an acknowledgement of the full man, the genius and the flaws, the light and the darkness. In breaking her silence, she gave permission for others to remember Michael Landon honestly, without the mask, without the myth. For fans, it is a reminder that even legends are human, and for his family, it is proof that love and pain can exist side by side, bound forever in the story of a man who once seemed larger than life. For more emotional stories, check out this video.